It's time for the Rose Chat Podcast, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the world's most beloved flower, the rose. Join award-winning gardeners Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington as they chat with rose lovers and experts from around the globe. With each episode, you'll gain valuable knowledge and insights to achieve the rose garden you've always dreamed of. Listen now as we explore the world of roses.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome Mike Shoup to the podcast. Mike has had a major impact on the world of roses through things like rose rescue, writing, owning a nursery, and so much more. He is a passionate ambassador for the rose. I remember hearing years ago someone called him the poet of old garden roses, and I never forgot that. Don't you just love that? So I hear you, Mike. So let's jump in and learn from him today. Hey, Mike, welcome to Rose Chat.
Oh, thank you so much, Teresa. It's wonderful to be here.
So we're going to call you the poet forever.
Okay.
Now, Mike, I'd heard about you and Antique Rose Emporium for many years. I'd actually ordered roses from there. But the first time I felt like I really knew who you were was through the TEDTalk. And that's when you talked about how I got schooled by an old rose. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that was kind of an interesting talk, but it does kind of exemplify kind of my passion for the rose and kind of a process of what I went through in order to make roses important in my life. And I began essentially by being in love with horticulture, and I went and got a master's degree in horticulture and all that, and so I knew I'd have something to do with it. Interesting enough, at that time I had very little interest in roses. Roses were these fussy plants that had all these schedules, and considered them to be difficult, and I was a more of a practical guy that wanted plants to be successful and not be so troublesome. So roses weren't in my dictionary at all. And for me to talk about roses today shows you the complete turnaround that I had. And that kind of happened because I found old roses. I found roses growing in cemeteries and in abandoned home sites and places like that where they were not getting any care from man's hands. And so with that in mind, I thought these things were kind of needed a second look, and took some cuttings home of some of these roses, grew them in the same environment that I grow my other plants, and found that they flourished. And what was interesting to me was that they didn't behave like the roses that were kind of being promulgated in the modern times, the cut flower roses, the beautiful roses that we have for show quality and stuff. They were very different. These were plants that were essentially struggling to survive in these abandoned places, or these places where they were not getting the typical care that you would give a rose. And therein I found what was so fascinating about these plants. And as I grew them, I realized that they had qualities that were very, very different than modern roses, or roses that were being promoted in modern times. These roses had essentially two things that really struck me as being unique, and that one of them was of course fragrance. And fragrance, I think, is understated how important it is. These are fragrance is an aspect that human nature cultivates in a very secretive way, and so in some way I think it's kind of like the emotion, and it's the memory. So when you have fragrance with flowers, it taps into a part of human nature that I think is very important. And this is one aspect that these roses had, and it's not just a single kind of fragrance. It's a nuance of many different fragrances that these roses have. So, you don't have just fragrances of citrus or of damask. You have a multitude of different fragrances, and all of them I essentially create a memory. And so this was one thing in the TED Talk that I really harped on, is the fact that when you have these roses that have this fragrance, you have something that's very special that almost creates an emotion that you'll always have a memory of, or it'll be a throwback to time when you once smelt that particular fragrance, and that memory comes into vivid focus again. And so that was one thing that I was really taken by, because most of the modern roses have had their fragrance bred out of them in favor of creating these real strong stemmed, brightly colored, perfect roses. But they in doing that, the breeders bred out a lot of the characteristics that these roses used to have, including fragrance. And so that was very meaningful to me, and I wanted to share that in this TED Talk. But not only that, the other aspect of roses that I've come to really fall in love with was the fact that they had diversity of form. And that's kind of an unusual way to talk about roses, but if you think about it, it's a wonderful attribute, because these roses are not bred to be these like soldiers that you put in a rectangular bed so that you can walk around and spray them all the time. These are very unique and different in their behaviors and their personality and the way they grow. And so they're all different, which means that you as a gardener have essentially clay to work with in your garden and use them in so many different ways. So they make you, the gardener, an artist. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really like, is the fact that these roses have that diversity of form that beg them to be used in the architecture of your home, on a fence or on a wall or within a bed or with other plants. They beg you to use them in different ways. And that, along with the fragrance, makes these really the ultimate garden plant. So I was hooked. And that's essentially what my TED Talk spoke about, was the fact that we have kind of gotten away from thinking about roses as being just show quality and back to being roses that belong in the garden. And so that's kind of what I dwelt on in that particular time.
Well, you still, I think, are the only person I know who had a TED Talk. And friends, you can still watch Mike's TED Talk on YouTube. Just search out How I Got Schooled by an Old Rose. And I think it's 12 minutes long or something, but it's definitely worth your time. Now, you've talked about many attributes of those roses. So let's move into the landscaping with them. You literally wrote the book on this. You have the book out, Landscaping with Antique Roses, which is a wonderful book. So you see the value in these antique roses, but help us use them in the landscape.
Well, there's so many ways, Teresa. There's going back onto that quality of diversity, that's the beauty of these roses. There are so many different types. I love the climbing roses. Let's just talk about them for a second. They're some of the most, I think, evocative plants that you can use in the landscape. We can put shrub roses in our garden and shrub plants, and they'll anchor the garden and make the garden beautiful in their own way. But when you have a climbing rose that's blooming on a particular structure that you have probably spent money on so that you could adorn it with this rose, when that rose goes into the bloom, you have something that goes beyond what the shrub roses can do. I always call climbing roses the ooh and ah of your landscape.
That is so true.
Because they take you beyond the just the normal tapestry of your garden. It's kind of like when we had our garden at the Antique Rose Emporium, we have lots of shrub roses, and I have one of them in particular that I always remember, and it was Old Blush, the old China rose that blooms all the time, and we had it on our split rail fence. And this split rail fence was almost 300 feet long. It was like a football field long. And we had all those roses along it. And we would go and we'd cut that rose right at the top rail. And then in the springtime, in April, it would bloom, and it would be like that fence is perfectly adorned with that rose. And people would bring out their cameras and they would take pictures, and it was just, everybody was aflutter. But what was even more profound was we had climbing old blush on an old, kind of dilapidated windmill. And when it went into bloom, and we trained it up there real tidy so that it was not chaotic looking, it beautified, the windmill. And when it bloomed, it was like Southern Living came out and started taking pictures, because all of a sudden it took the garden into a whole different stage. So climbing roses, I always say, are the ooh and ah of your landscape, because they are so much more dramatic. They give so much more emotion, to your landscape. And so when you have climbing roses bloom, you call your neighbors and you have a party, because that's how beautiful they are. So thinking of it that way, there are so many different roses. I even broadened out from my landscaping with antique roses into a book called Empress of the Garden, which delves into not only how you use these roses in the garden in different ways, but because of their personality, they beg you to use them in certain ways. For instance, you've got the petulant divas. These are the drama queens, is what I call them. And these are roses that are so voluptuous and so beautiful when they bloom. As you enter the garden, they tell you, don't you dare look at anybody else. I'm the only thing that's worth looking at right now. They're that kind of power in the garden. And so you have those types of roses. You have the stay-at-home mom roses. Those are the roses that you plant, and they do their job. They're so strong. They anchor the garden. You can do all your other chores and do all your other work because they're there for the long haul, doing all the work and being beautiful all the time. These are roses like the China roses and the tea roses that we have certainly here in the South, and up in in other parts of the country, they would be the shrub roses that are just carefree, like Carefree Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And those roses are just there for the long haul. So when we start looking at roses that way, you realize that you have really, you really are kind of an artist, that you have all the components to throw around plants in your landscape so that they work for you in the way that their personality dictates. And so you use climbing roses that, to create the drama, to create the settings where you might have a glass of wine or certainly a cup of coffee in the morning, sitting under under the petals and the fragrance. Or you have the petulant divas, or you have the girls, I call them the wide-skirted ladies that have the umbrellas that kind of cascade over themselves. So there's just so many different personalities. And speaking of, the one thing that we have really embraced was the fact that these old roses do so well with other plants. And I think that's another thing that needs to be delved into. We've gotten away to where we create rose gardens in so many situations, but we can do so much better when we plant roses with other plants. Mm-hmm. And in so doing, we don't make these roses, so important all the time. They're just going to ebb and flow with all the other plants in your garden, and they're not going to be, prima donnas where you have to have them look good all the time. They can ebb and flow and look good through the seasons, just like some of your other plants. And as a result, you're not fussing over them all the time. They perform when they're going to perform, and when they're not performing, other plants are performing. So the whole garden is always looking good. So we really concentrate on making sure that when we're using these roses, we use perennials and annuals, other shrubs that are compatible and that actually embellish or are a contrast to the roses, so that your overall garden is always having fun. And I think that, the seasons also play an awful important part in this. We go through the years. I have one thing noticed, that in my 50 years of gardening, every year is different. And that is such a beautiful thing to embrace. I always thought that I could plant, certain plants together and have that interplay be the same every year. It is never the same. And in so and in that context of watching these plants, therein lies the ultimate beauty, because nothing is ever the same, and that is always something to look forward to in your garden. So that's essentially the way we use these roses, is that we have a relationship with them. We realize that their structures, their personality, the way they bloom, their interplay with other plants are such that you can learn about this and explore that in your own gardening.
Now, we've talked about structures and fences and that sort of thing, and I have that in my garden. My garden is a little less than an acre. But what about those who have a smaller garden? So I know you have some petites. What is it that you call the petites? You have all these
Well,
classic name groups. Well, there's something you can call the petites. I can't find it right now, but
I mean, I love massing a lot of these plants in smaller drifts, on the front of the borders. I love using roses in containers, and
Mhm.
certainly for the smaller garden, you can do that. The beauty behind that is you have mobility, and so you can move these roses around to catch the sunlight, or to catch the angle, or to create a party setting for a particular evening. So that's the beauty of having these roses in pots. You also can, you can play the better bloomers for certain times of importance. So you can move them around. Uh, Certainly, that works well for the smaller garden. Um, of most importance, of course, is sun exposure. Most of these roses need at least a half a day of sun. So if you have an afternoon or a morning of exposure, then that's usually adequate. And even in a smaller garden, you can have a lot of interplay with that. Climbing roses, despite their name and despite the fact that most of them can get giant, actually require a lot less space than people realize, because you're always training them vertically. And I think that's one of the aspects of climbing roses that allows you to beautify structures, fences, or arbor, or a trellis. And in so doing, you're dealing only with a vertical element, and not one that is coming out horizontally, taking up a lot of room. So again, climbers are one of I think the most fantastic things to use. And speaking of that, we always worry about roses, blooming all the time, and I've learned that that's not necessarily the most important quality of a rose. Certainly, you like to have flowers year round, but some of the most dramatic plants in my garden are once bloomers, and it's you've heard the adage that a once blooming climbing rose can put on as many blooms as a repeat blooming rose takes all year to do. So it's kind of like you get this unbelievable flash of color for 2 or 3 weeks out of the year that heralds the coming of spring, or just announces the fact that I'm here, and you can really relish the beauty of these climbing roses, the ones that only bloom in the spring, or once a year. So I'm not discouraged by that. In fact, I would implore everybody to have at least one spring blooming rose in their garden, because it is so dramatic, and it does just kind of announce itself to a particular part of time in the year that as you see every year is kind of a wonderful thing to experience.
That is so true for those of us that are in the North Country. It's just something that is just something to behold, because it's coming after a very dark, dead time. Down in the South, maybe you don't have quite such a dramatic change between winter and spring, but we do. And there is simply nothing like that first bloom of an old rose. I've
Exactly.
got one scampering up an evergreen that will just stop you in your tracks. However, I can barely see it, but my neighbors love it.
There you go.
I have to go to
Well, there,
their garden to see it.
that's right. Well, that's good. Well, we've got many roses that are good for the neighbors. You know, there's also a rose that's good for their neighbors that actually shuts them out. So
Many,
that's what
many.
that's what the climbing roses can do, and some of the bigger ones, exactly.
And you know, they provide such good structure. You mentioned structure, but we have about paired with just about every one of our big climbers, we have big clematis as well. So when the roses are finished, that structure is then just filled with purple blooms of a clematis or white blooms of a clematis. So they, you know, they give the other flowers a place to grow as well.
Well, that's just the crux of the matter, Teresa. It's
Mhm.
the fact that you interplay these plants together. Don't put the burden on the roses entirely. And that's I think that's a big message, because we've been so unfair to roses. We've demanded them be perfect, at least, you know, and that's just not going to be the case. Let the rose do what it's going to do, and then embellish it by putting things around it that allows it to have its time and then rest, and then other things come into play. I think that's one of the best things about gardening with these roses is not put so much on them to be perfect. And when we do that, we really find ourselves enjoying the beauty of these plants.
Another attribute that we haven't really talked about, but it's so important to me, and that is they're kind of live in history. There's most of them have stories behind them that just take you into another place and time, and I love that as well. And I know that you know a lot about the whole rose rustling group that has been around for a while. So talk to us a little bit about that. You know, for those who don't know what a rose rustler is, tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of sounds like an illicit term of you know, rampaging and destroying things, but
Village.
it really comes out of a good cause. It's we there was a group with Bam Carrier and some of these Joe Woodard, some of these older members that I became friends with back when I was just getting involved with finding some of these old roses. They independently formed a loosely held group of people that would go out into the countryside and talk to homeowners, and a lot of times in these less affluent neighborhoods where people were not keeping up with the horticultural times and going out and buying plants, but they would share plants with each other. And in those homes and these places, these roses flourished because they would share them, and they were throwbacks of time when they would collect these roses, and they were so time tested and so durable that they survived. And that's the beauty behind a lot of these roses, is the fact that, you know, if you go into a cemetery and you find roses growing on a headstone that dates back, you know, 60 to 100 or even 150 years, you're looking at a rose that essentially is time tested through Mother Nature's laws of natural selection. It's kind of like you're privy to what she couldn't destroy. So you're getting the best of the best in terms of time tested, durable plants. And so as these rose rustlers discovered, these roses were still surviving. And the most beautiful thing about that is that we were finding roses that were not in commerce anymore, that had lost their names, and we had to give them found rose names. And we would take cuttings, and we would never pillage these roses by digging them up. We made sure that that rose was allowed to live into the future for just as many years as it's lived in the past. We wanted it to survive. But the beauty is because if we could get a clone of that plant, well, we could offer that in the spirit that it was truly a remarkable plant, and maybe keep it going in commerce again. And so that was the beauty of rose rustling, was to take cuttings on these time-tested survivors, bring them back into the future, and offer them in the spirit that they were truly wonderful plants because they had lived for so long. And the beauty is in most cases they were better than some of our modern roses because they had fragrance. They certainly had tenacity to live, and we all want that in our gardens without having to have the fussy spray schedules and stuff. So that was some of the magic of being a Texas rose rustler in that time, and that's essentially how the Antique Rose Emporium started, was through collections of roses from these independent, uh, you know, pioneers going out and trying to find roses that survived in their neighborhoods. And it truly was a joy to be involved with that group.
Oh, the stories I'm sure you heard, and the research that was done to get the background of the roses, that would have been super, super fun to be a part of. Now, then it was very hard to find them. It's getting a bit easier today. Now, you're not going to find them in the big box stores or probably not at your local nursery. I wish you could, but there are several places where we can get them now. So, what are some of the things that the companies that come to
Yeah.
mind where we can
Well,
find
there's
them today?
certainly, yeah, there's nurseries that are devoted to bringing back these different varieties, and they're in different parts of the country, which is good because their strengths are and in many cases where they are located. So you'll get different, more cold hardy roses in certain nurseries. You certainly have the Antique Rose Emporium still that is offering these roses. The heirloom roses is high country roses in Colorado is another one, and Rogue Valley. Rose
Mhm.
petals. There's several that come to come to mind that offer these roses. Along with in many cases shrub roses or some modern roses, but you can certainly get some of these older varieties that are very, very good for your particular location wherever you reside, and they all would help you with those selections. In terms of what has historically been good roses for particular locations and things. So that's not a hard thing. It still goes on, and I think it's a wonderful source.
Yes, it is. Now let's talk a little bit about rose care. I know that you probably have some time-tested trips. I'm thinking about like planting and pruning, disease treatment, if you want to delve into that. So, what advice would you give to someone getting started?
Well, Teresa, it's really just kind of a common sense thing with me, and it all's from the approach that you treat these roses very, very simply from the standpoint that they're garden plants.
Mhm.
So a good way to understand it is that old blush that I just mentioned on the split rail fence. It beautifies that fence because we keep it at around 3 to 4 feet so that when it blooms, it embellishes that fence. So you have the architecture of a particular location, like the fence or like a garden setting, that you want that rose to have a certain size. So I get my head shears out and I shear that plant down by cutting it and making it the size that I want it so that it looks good in context with the scale or the particular location that it resides. So that means that same old blush plant that I have growing over next to a wall that has a window that's 6 feet tall, and I want it right underneath that window to fit into that particular configuration. I allow that plant, the same old blush that I cut down to 3 feet over by the split rail fence, I let it get to be 6 feet, and it blooms and is beautiful. So pruning and shearing and stuff for these old roses is done very, very differently. It's done so that it fits in the garden. You don't have to follow the rules of the hybrid teas or the show quality rose where you cut them down a third, using particular branches and nodes facing certain ways. That's just not important at all with the older varieties. You treat them like they're landscape plants or garden plants. And so that really works. The other aspect is climbers. And I mentioned that they are the most important, I think, part of a garden because they are, again, the ooh and ah of your garden. They are the drama, and they are the ones that just create so much romance and feeling. In that, those plants require, in many cases, I say 95% of your work. They are hard to deal with, but they are so worth it. You have bought a structure like a trellis or an arbor or a walkway that you have spent money on, and you want to embellish that with a climber. So you spend all your time on a ladder training those canes tightly and weaving them on that particular structure so that structure looks beautiful and tidy and not chaotic with that climbing rose. Therefore, it requires all the work. An old blush shrub, I take about 2 minutes to prune. Climbing, I might take 2 to 3 hours or even longer to train it up on these structures. It takes 95% of your work. I keep saying that. But what you end up with is the most dramatic thing in the world. When that thing goes into bloom, you have that structure that you spent money on blooming beautifully with these climbing roses in perfect form. And it just is a picture book in Southern Living magazine or whatever, because it is so perfect. And that, I think, is a very important quality, because most people plant climbing roses, call me 2 years later saying, what am I doing? It's grabbing children off the street, because it's so chaotic. And that is not why you bought that rose.
Well, I'm looking out my window right now, and Peggy Martin is a bit chaotic. She needs a touch before
There are
I can
some,
come in for winter.
I call those roses, they're unbelievably tenacious tomboys, and there's nothing you can do with them. No matter what you do, they're going to outgrow the situation you planned on them. But they're definitely worth it, because they harbor all the all the birds and the wildlife, and I mean, there's just so many attributes that you get with these different roses, and you just have to have a relationship with them to know how much they can give you. And I love what the old quote from the Little Prince at the very end, and it's about this cultivation of a rose, and the ending statement is it's the work that you give to the rose that creates its value. And isn't that the truth? Anything that you spend time on, is where you get its value. And so I think that that's so important. I also loved something that Felder Rushing, a good friend of mine in the South. He was an extension agent for a while. He spoke, and he said, your neighbors are going to talk about you anyway. So you might as well go out and have fun and do what you want to do in your garden. And isn't that the truth too? We all are so worried about being so perfect that in many cases, a lot of these roses allow you to kind of branch out and to do things that are so creative and so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And your neighbors are going to talk about you, but it might be in a good way after all. So
It
that's
just
good.
might. It just might. Now, I want to go back to Old Blush on the Fence. What time of year, what part of the season are you doing that big trim with those hedge clippers?
Well, typically it's around 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks before your peak bloom. So for us in Texas, we have our peak bloom starting really in April. So, February 15th, somewhere around then, we'll go out and we'll prune all our roses. And I think that would go up for each zone, probably, 10 to 15 days. So for us in zone 8, it's about February 15th, and then zone 6, it might be, March, 6th or 8th. And for you, it might be, end of March, something like that. I'm not really sure, but it would be essentially when you want peak bloom to occur 6 weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
And we also in Texas do that in the summer before our fall bloom, which is usually in October. So we'll prune late August or early September so that we have beautiful October and November blooms, which is going on right now. And so our fall, we prune for peak times
Mm-hmm.
on that. And these are, of course, with only the ever blooming roses, the roses that typically bloom on new wood after you cut them.
Yes.
There's a few roses that, like some of the climbers and ramblers that we talked about, that, you don't want to prune too much in the middle of the winter, because you'll be pruning off a lot of the wood that would be blooming in the spring.
Yeah, most of mine, I prune them a bit after they bloom, right after they bloom, and then I don't touch them after that. They go through the
Right,
winter,
exactly.
and yeah, or I'd be cutting off the bloom. But Peggy, she has to be dealt with a couple of 3 times a year. So my
Speaking of
tenacious
Peggy,
tomboy, I'm always going to think about that now.
well, that's what she is. And speaking of Peggy, we actually have her coming and speaking at the Heritage Rose Foundation conference that we're having in May this next coming year. So Peggy Martin will be coming, and we've got several speakers. Greg Grant, is talking. He's a great extension agent up here that's written books with Bill Welch, and so he's going to be talking, and he's always a very charismatic speaker. Claude Graves is going to be talking about the Ramblers. We have Dee
Okay.
Nash. I know Dee you know Dee real well. She's excellent. And
Oh,
Peggy,
yes, she's a dear friend of mine, and she actually was on Rose Chat just a month or two
yes,
ago.
exactly. And Shauna Moore from the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. So we've got so many people. Andrew Bacaro, who was my breeder at the Antique Rose Emporium, is going to be talking about some of the pioneer roses that we've developed there. And so I'm really excited about the foundation. They are I kind of got myself immersed into the leadership of of the organization again. Stephen, bless his heart, has stepped down. He's done such a magnificent job. Stephen
Yes, yes.
Scaniello, and so I'm assumed the presidency for a while, and we're having some fun creating this conference and kind of spreading the word of preservation of these old roses, which I think is so important because I just can't help but feel like when I'm outside that I'm more healthy and plants and kind of I don't know. I think they go along with the fact that we just need to get outside more and being able to garden is so important and having a particular plant like a rose to bring me out is has been fun. So there's a lot of camaraderie with these people that we have, and so I'm glad to be involved with the foundation again in that regard.
Um, we didn't mention it, but he's become the president of the Heritage Rose Foundation, and they do have a conference coming up May 1 through the third, 1st through the 3rd, and it's going to be in Tyler, Texas, which is the rose capital of the world, or rose capital of America, let's just say. And
Okay.
all those great speakers all in one spot. And you can find out more information by going to the Heritage Rose Foundation website, which is heritagerosefoundation.org. So you can check all of that out. And a great group of people, such a great group of people.
Yeah, I've been really excited to be involved. Interesting enough, it was started back in 1986 by Charles Walker, and he led the way. I think he was a visionary in terms of being able to start this process of preservation and saving these roses. And even today, his earlier mission statements of education and research and creating a repository and a library. All this is what the foundation is involved with. And education is one of the most important things, and that's what this conference is about, as well as having a lot of fun with a lot of like-minded people. So I hope we can, continue to grow the organization. It's a great cause.
It certainly is. And, being around like-minded people, isn't it just the best?
It is.
People to enable you to do what you already want to do. And,
Yeah.
after I talk to you, I think, okay, so I need this rose and this rose and this rose, and I need more. It just is, they just do set the stage. You talked about that a lot, but it is the truth. When people come to my garden, I know there's lots of things that they see that they, might enjoy, but nothing gets their attention like those roses, those big old flouncy roses growing over the arbors or climbing up the side of the potting shed or up the up a tree. It's just something that's special that you get to be a part of.
Teresa, I'd love for the whole gardening world to use the word. It's the ooh and ah of the
Yep,
garden.
it
Yeah,
is.
that's exactly what these climbers are, and they need to be employed a whole lot more, and they need to be. I mean, the only thing is they take work. You have to train them and make sure they get up there. But once you do, it's just like a magical thing. So
It
uh,
is.
that's it's. I'm glad you allowed me the time to to throw that out there.
Well, this has just been so fun. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's what a pleasure. You want me, you make me want to plant them all.
Oh well, that we can only do so much. So but there's always room for another rose. That's what I've learned.
Yes. Someone said, was it Bob Martin that said the best companion for a rose is another rose? So that was Bob Martin.
That's right.
I do like my other companions, but I think they do, highlight the roses, but I couldn't do without the roses. But that was Bob Martin for you.
Yeah, he was great.
He was great. So thanks so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Teresa. It's been lovely talking to you.
And friends, I hope you enjoyed today's program. And if you did, please share it with others. Also, go check out Mike's TED Talk on YouTube. It's a great one. For some of us, the garden season is winding down. And around here, we're knee deep in fallen leaves and long shoots on the Peggy Martin rose. But for those of you in the other part of the hemisphere that's just getting started with spring, well, I'm certainly enjoying your IG post. It's lots of fun to see you getting all excited about the new. And friends, until next time, happy gardening or happy garden planning.
You've been listening to the Rose Chat Podcast with Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington, expert rose gardeners who want to help you achieve the rose garden of your dreams. Don't miss an episode. Listen anytime on our website at rosechatpodcast.com or listen on the go via the Rose Chat app on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Share this podcast with your social networks and join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by using the hashtag RoseChat. Join us next time for another edition of the Rose Chat Podcast. The Rose Chat Podcast is a production of the Rose Chat Media Group, Birmingham, Alabama.